To say that crafting has become a major part of gaming is an understatement, but each game that includes crafting has its own flavor on how to do it. I mean, you got your hardcore survival experiences like The Forest and Green Hell that you can enjoy alone, or if you're too scared, you can play with friends. Then there's your experiences like 7 Days to Die, where most of the fun comes from hours of building whatever you can think of with friends. And heck, even many of your typical single-player games now have some kind of crafting in them.
So Arcadia's Requisition is no different. It has its own unique approach to crafting. In fact, really its whole selling point is for players to be able to duct tape pretty much anything they can find together, create over-the-top weapons, and violently kill zombies with friends. Sadly, I have no friends. I'm totally fine.
Now, I was coming in hot off the tracks with Arcadia's previous VR game called Hinge, and that was a hellish roller coaster of a ride that had an amazing atmosphere with great graphics and an intriguing story. Requisition is very different, and I do have some negative things to say in this review, but I want you to understand that Requisition is in early access and these developers are talented and working on improving the experience. With that said though, Hinge is one of my current favorite horror games and I'd like to see them revisit the property.
And this hinges on Requisition success. This is why I don't have friends.
Okay, we all got eyeballs. I mean, most of us do, and if not, I think playing VR would be pretty hard. But I digress. Requisition won't make you want to gouge out your own soul windows because it looks alright, and about what you'd expect from your average VR game. However, when compared to Hinge, it doesn't really have as much artistic direction, which is a shame because the artwork really made the game appear to have an almost Mad Max punk apocalypse vibe. And while you can customize your character a bit to give off that persona, I would have liked to see a bit more of that design implemented into the zombies themselves. Overall though, it has some nice gore effects, environmental detail is pretty good, and not too bad at character models or environmental scale. However, the same can't really be said about the sound, as it's incredibly disappointing. And I'm sorry to compare this game so much to their previous work, but it's kind of inevitable when I played them back to back, and Hinge was thematically involved with sound, so the music and creepy things you hear throughout the story just created a beautiful and haunting soundscape, and Requisition just pales in comparison.
So while the presentation can leave a bit to be desired, Requisition actually has a narrative that far surpasses the reach of Hinge.
The story could be comparable to Left 4 Dead, where there's some lore within the game, but overall, the whole experience is not heavily focused on a story. At the beginning of each mission, you have an interesting comic book style introduction that loosely explains what's going on and why you're in that particular location. None of them are super interesting, but the exception of one that takes place on a farm and people are being held captive there. Hearing about the farmers prior to the outbreak was pretty enjoyable, even if it was a bit generic. However, the best thing about the story mode is that it provides a purpose and a set of goals for the player to go after, and I think the cabin mission does it the best out of all of them. What I enjoyed about it so much is that it feels like it utilized all the game's mechanics just super organically. On each level you arrive on a bus with essentially no weapons, and you have to start searching the area quickly because zombies will start coming after you. The cabin's no different, and you can quickly find an axe that seems actually in place considering you're at a cabin in the woods. The axe along with the sledgehammer are some of the most effective melee weapons in the game that you don't have to craft, and it's insanely satisfying to get a sick decapitation on a zombie using either of these. But I digress. After finding something to defend yourself, you can clear out the zombies lurking inside of the cabin, and it's here that you can start breaking down almost anything into scrap material to use for making trap devices and bombs. And you can do this by grabbing the hammer on the left side of your chest, and it can also be used to break down weapons into their raw components. While these are all things you can do in any mode of the game, in this particular level they're all part of the goals that you can see by accessing the PDA on your left wrist. And it's here that you'll see you'll need to find a battery to power the gate and access the shed. After you find the battery and have access to the shed, you can start crafting traps and explosives. You do this by sacrificing the junk you've collected to the Elder Gods and adding the newly crafted creations to your backpack, very similar to the Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. With duct tape located on the right side of your chest, you can combine just about anything you find. But there are some items that can create special high damage weapons, and these heroic weapons are the best means of defending against multiple waves of zombies at once. While you kill zombies, you rack up cash and you can spend it at vending machines, and while this works great for a horde mode, it feels out of place in the environment, and it hurt the element of finding the resources to make your own weapons and traps. Now I could see this for health pickups or maybe some kind of temporary buffs, but in many of the levels it seemed like you were almost required to purchase something if you wanted to finish crafting a special weapon. After you get done crafting, you can take your traps and explosives around the house and set up a super sick defense, and the last thing that I did in particular was take the wood scraps and start placing them in windows and doorways to create barriers. Now what I really loved about this was that you actually have to take out the hammer that you use to break down materials and physically nail them to the walls. It was something simple and easy enough that added a subtle boost of immersion that I really enjoyed. After you complete all the goals on your PDA, you'll get a warning that some zombies heard you and they're on their way. Then you gotta defend against a few waves before the mission ends. Sadly, the cabin is one of the only missions that I felt really incorporated every gameplay mechanic thoughtfully. And I guess it's okay that the story isn't the main focus of Requisition because it does feature a lot of other modes and the core gameplay is pretty enjoyable. And what everyone will want to do is learn how to efficiently craft those heroic weapons, which can be a bit of a challenge when you're under pressure and being chased by zombies, and this is where I went into the sandbox mode, and it left me with a lot of questions.
First off, I have to give the developers credit because the sandbox mode is a post-launch free update that they had on their content roadmap and they actually delivered on it. However, it doesn't feel like a fleshed out or proper sandbox mode.
You only have one map and it's a suburban house with a fenced-in yard. You start out in the yard and have 3 workbenches along with your trap and explosive crafting tables. One bench is dedicated to pre-made guns and ammunition, another spawns in items for crafting, and the last one spawns zombies and starts enemy waves. Now this sounds fine on paper, but the largest issue is that the item spawn is completely random, so you can start overwhelming the game engine trying to build just a simple weapon. My second issue is that you cannot move these benches anywhere, and for myself in particular, I'd like to have a tower defense style game where I am hiding inside the house with an infinite crafting table and can annihilate zombies. Sadly, as it currently stands, if you want to make traps, you have to gather all your resources, go inside, lay the traps, and then you got to go back outside to start the zombie waves, and it just makes it overly complicated. Not to mention you can set off your own traps on accident, and this is just a weird choice to me because you have an entire menu system built into your left arm, and I just don't understand why Arcadia didn't make it to where you could control the entire sandbox instance from inside of there instead. Now my final big issue is that in an extremely unique crafting game, besides for boarding up the windows and doors, there just isn't any environmental building that you can do. I mean, it really isn't like 7 Days to Die where you can build structures or houses. It's only traps and weapons.
So it's kind of like having a sandbox with the sand and shovels, but nothing to actually make castles with, which is arguably the most fun part of the sandbox. I mean, besides having friends, of course. However, this is where I wish my viewers better luck than myself, because Arcadia did send me out a couple extra game codes, and since I really had no one to play with, I actually am going to give one lucky winner away 2 Steam codes. Since this is a giveaway, I'm going to need you to pull out your PDA, and you can see the official rules and figure out how to enter right here.
Hi. While I found the Horde mode to be fairly rudimentary, it's still quite frantic and a extremely fun time when you're playing with a friend. The mode happens in waves and lets you start out with pistols and plenty of ammunition. As you kill zombies, they're going to drop more ammo, melee weapons, and guns, and in between rounds you have a small cooldown window and you can prepare for the next wave of zombies as the difficulty keeps on increasing. However, the massive issue that I encountered with Horde mode is that it bugged out after playing for about 45 minutes, and instead of spawning new waves of zombies, the wave would just begin and no zombies would ever come. My co-op partner and I debated whether there was something we were supposed to do, but it just seemed like we got unlucky, so we ended up quitting to the lobby.
Regardless though, I didn't want to let my only friend escape, and since we hadn't tried PvP mode out, I decided let's hop into that next. Now, this may be a bit of a hot take, but I honestly think that the PvP is going to be this game's biggest asset besides the unique crafting system. Because honestly, this is where my brother and I had the most amount of fun. We were laughing, scaring each other, crafting crazy stuff, and having just a good time.
Oh, nice shot.
You know, it really is a shame that they only have 2 maps available right now for this mode, because this is certainly what I can see myself coming back to over and over again. And if I had to compare it to something, it really reminds me of the Last of Us multiplayer mode. Obviously it feels more lighthearted, but it's just extremely enjoyable. This for me would ideally become the largest component of the game. If you added more focus on matchmaking for PvP and added different game modes, honestly, this would be so much fun. In the over 8 hours that I spent playing this game, the small fraction of time that I spent in the PvP mode was the best part of the experience. And this brings me to the overall value of the game, as it's currently in early access and sells for $20 on Steam, but also has an extremely unique crafting system that is really fun to play around with. Every other game I talked about in this video knows what it is and what it does well. Even Arcadia's last game that I loved knows that it's a terrifying exploration horror game. My biggest issue with Requisition as a whole is that the game just feels like it didn't have a clear vision at the start.
And despite it feeling like it has a lack of content, I actually think it just has an issue with the focus of the content. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but when you have all these semi-duct taped together ideas that ultimately leads to the game feeling like it has not enough content, then I think it means that something has gone seriously wrong along the way.
This is by no means saying that Arcadia should give up, and in fact they seem super passionate about supporting the game into the future, even with a planned launch on the Quest 2 and PlayStation VR 2. But right now, before drip feeding more content on the roadmap, I would seriously evaluate and consider what you guys want the game to look like 1 year from now. What is your major focus going to be? What's going to be the thing that attracts people to the game? And in my non-game developer opinion, it would essentially become the Last of Us multiplayer in virtual reality. I also truly believe that if you went that route, you'd end up having a better chance in the future of monetization, with players being able to buy things like cosmetics, battle passes, and all that kind of crap that they like. And that way you guys can focus on adding more competitive maps and modes as free updates. I would also highly encourage some level of community modding tools be made available. That way you could allow players to make more story and objective based missions. I would imagine this takes pressure off of you from developing more non-monetizable content, and also keep players engaged while you guys are focusing on the quality of life and service updates that are ultimately more financially viable.
That's all I got though for Requisition VR, and if you're interested in the game, be sure to check out the description down below right past the like button to see the official rules on how to enter. Anyways, if you made it this far, I just want to say thank you, and I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, later.